the merchant account is the account that moves the monies or the sales monies from the customer's account to the business account. So, an example, you're in a shop and you're buying some clothes at the checkout, and you put in your PIN into the chip and PIN terminal, and then it authorizes. So, that is the communication between customer bank account and business bank account saying, they've got the funds here, we're good to go, you can make that sale. Who needs a merchant account? Anyone that's selling anything, I would say, nowadays. We specialize in high risk, so it's not that scary. It is laughable, though, what people think they can get away with. It has to go through an underwriting process. So somebody has to, or a machine has to, look at your case and say, look, first of all, are you legal and you're doing the right thing? And does it stack up for us as a business? Does it fit our criteria? If so, brilliant. Off you go, have a merchant account.
Hi, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Today with
Sure, yeah.
you have Elena from bizconsumer.com. Today, our expert will help you to better understand what a merchant account is and how to create it. Our expert, Libby James, will share with you the tips and tricks on how to avoid merchant account scams, how to protect yourself and your business. She will also share with you reliable information to help you make critical decisions for your business with confidence. Libby James is a co-founder of Merchant Advice Service that offers free advice for business owners, processing card payments, and searching for financing online. With more than 12 years of experience in the financial and retail industry, Libby James educates people and provides expertise in the merchant industry. I give you Libby James. What is your experience with merchant accounts, payment getaways, and the financial industry overall? Please tell us a couple of words about that.
So I kind of stumbled into financial services. I worked for a long time as an estate agent, and then got into mortgage broking off the back of that, which is where I met my business partner, David. And we kind of saw a lack of transparency within the merchant services world. So mortgages, for those of you who don't know, super regulated. You have to dot the I's, cross the T's, all the rest of it. Merchant services was polar opposite to that when we started out. So we really saw this gap in the market for an advice-based site, and that's where kind of Merchant Advice Service was born. And it kind of became my obsession to learn everything about the industry and to be the business people's champion. So to talk to customers like you would your mate in a bar over a glass of wine, give the type of advice that you genuinely appreciate. And then we've kind of since then built networks of brokers and banks that work alongside us. So not only can we offer advice, but we can also offer solutions. So that's kind of our background. So simply put, the merchant account is the account that moves the monies or the sales monies from the customer's account to the business account. So an example, you're in a shop and you're buying some clothes at the checkout, and you put in your PIN into the chip and PIN terminal, and then it authorizes. So that is the communication between customer bank account and business bank account saying, they've got the funds here, we're good to go, you can make that sale. So that's probably the easiest way to describe a merchant account. Wow, well, that's increased dramatically in recent months, mainly with obviously people not taking so much cash nowadays off the back of the pandemic, dare I mention it. So probably rewind 4 or 5 years ago when we started this, it was your mainstream retailers, your high street shops and things like that. Now you can go to a Christmas fair and you can pay for a burger on a card. And especially with consumers using things like Apple Pay and mobile payments, that's really increased the demand for merchant accounts. So who needs a merchant account? Anyone that's selling anything, I would say, nowadays.
Like you mentioned, here comes the pandemic, and I ain't got nothing better to do than sitting at home So I ate up all my reserves, and I remember that, whoa, I'm baking fairly decent cookies. So I decided to sell these cookies. I want to use this payment method that you are talking about, the merchant account. How do I create it? And do I need anybody or anything's approval for it? And if I do, how do I get approved for it? What's the process of setting such an account up?
There's different types of accounts. So in that circumstance, a new business, a business from home, you probably use a solution such as a little chip and pin machine like the Squares, the SumUps, the PayPals. And they can get approved quite quickly. They almost offer them, well, they offer them in a couple of days with very little underwriting surrounding that. But if your business is more complicated or a little bigger than the example that you mentioned, then you're probably going to want to source an acquiring bank provider purely because the overall cost for you as a business would be lower. The PayPals and the Squares and the SumUps, they make their money because they charge large percentages per transaction that you take. Whereas if you went to, say, the person that's offering your business bank, they would probably offer it to you at a lot lower rate, but charge you to rent a terminal. So there isn't a blanket answer for how do we go and get a merchant account, because each business is different and each bank has varying criteria as to what they'll onboard. If you're totally stuck, use a broker that has access to loads of different banks, because they can put you in the right direction, and they can help package your application properly to get it approved. Well, you're probably talking weeks at the minute because loads of people are taking cards now that weren't. But pre the pandemic, yeah, you can get an account agreed in a couple of days. Providing, and that's why using a broker is quite good, because they'll be able to help you get all of your paperwork together and send it off to the bank and get it approved really quickly, rather than kind of toing and froing and going back and forth with different requirements.
What I read in one of the articles, and it was actually an article that was mostly dedicated to it, is something called high risk merchant account. What is that? What is the difference between it and the regular merchant account? Because I don't like the words high risk right there.
Okay, so we specialize in high risk, so it's not that scary. So high risk isn't always the businesses that you would automatically think as high risk, first of all. So I'll give you a few examples in a minute, but basically it's industries that experience chargebacks within the industry, or they have quite a long time between the customer ordering the product and receiving the product, or they've got a lot of fraud historically. So the banks will balance onboarding that type of business with offering slightly different terms, such as higher rates or a rolling reserve, which is like a deposit that sits on your account. So providing it's legal, you can place the majority of businesses with high risk providers. A lot of the time it's not going to be with your high street bank that you're really familiar with, and some of the time it's going to be with an offshore account provider, but it can be done. So you walk into the shop, you order your kitchen on day one, and then you don't take delivery until, say, I don't know, day 60. You've paid for part of those goods, and within that time frame, lots of things can go wrong. The customer can change their mind, the business could fold, there could be loads of different things that go wrong in that period of time. And because it's long periods of time, the banks need to balance that risk. So they'll do things like say to merchants, right, okay, we'll onboard you, but we're going to keep a percentage of your takings for X amount of time and release them when we know that everything's going well.
So let's say somebody with a bad credit wants to establish a merchant account. Is it possible to do that? And if it is there something that this person needs to know about setting up an account under the circumstances that the person is having a bad credit?
So I suppose the first thing here is that within merchant services, we have a thing called the match list, basically, that if you get put on the match list for bad credit or bankruptcy or something, then it's almost impossible to get you placed anywhere else. So that's kind of the key thing when we're placing customers with banks. In terms of personal credit and business credit, a lot is done on the company address. So that's quite important. And again, it's the variation. So if you had a couple of late payments back in 2012, that it's really simple to get that sorted. If you were made bankrupt yesterday, finding processes that are going to onboard you at that point becomes a little more tricky. And I never say never, but the terms that you're going to be offered at that point with extreme adverse credit are going to be sticky. As long as you're not on that match list that I mentioned, then it's feasible. It's really hard to give a blanket answer to credit related questions because the extremes of the adverse credit itself can be really, really difficult to understand, an individual as well.
Are there merchant account scams? If there are, what are they? And how can one protect themselves against such scams?
What my fight personally is against the lack of transparency within the industry. And basically what we come across a lot of is headline rates being really, really super appealing. And you're like, I'm not going to beat that rate anywhere else. So for the viewers that don't know, you're charged a percentage rate per transaction that you take through your business account. And there are lots of tricks of the trade to hide fees. So some brokers or providers will advertise really cheap rates, and then they'll charge massive fees for your chip and pin terminal, or their settlement times are really lengthy, or you've got a hell of a rolling reserve, and lots of different elements that you need to consider before signing on the dotted line for a merchant account. And what I try and do, and the guys at Merchant Advice Service that we work alongside, is encourage businesses to compare on a pound for pound or dollar for dollar in your case basis. So, right, okay, what's the bottom line? What did I process last month? What's my split of credit and debit cards? What's that actually going to cost me? And if I move somewhere else, what am I going to save? It's the lack of transparency as a whole and the pricing structures as a whole, because they vary from bank to bank. And we look at a lot of transaction statements on a daily basis, and some of them are almost funny because I'm just like, how can you get away with charging some of the stuff? But I guess to the business owner, they're like, right, I've got a brilliant rate. I'm not going to get 0.2 whatever elsewhere. Yeah, exactly. It is laughable though what people think they can get away with, and it's businesses that process through the same provider for years and years and years, and they don't even realize their costs are increasing or their terms are changing until you sit down and look at it with them and say, hang on a minute, come on, and you move them elsewhere.
What, in your experience, what do people complain about the most?
Okay, well, I guess the fees and stuff, but I suppose from a business point of view, it's when people are terminated. So the kind of key providers, the Stripes, the PayPals, etc., they will onboard merchants really quickly with a really, really quick underwriting process, and then they'll go back and review it. Because their selling point is getting card machines out quick and doing it in volume. So a lot of the time businesses will be processing, and then 6-12 months down the line, they'll receive a letter saying, we don't onboard businesses like you. 30 days notice, off you go find someone else. Now that's one example of that, but that can happen in other circumstances. So you can be processing with a bank, large mainstream banks as well, and they're always balancing their risk portfolio. So they can choose at any given point to move away from a certain sector, and say, do you know what, we don't want you anymore, go and find somebody else. And then we have to find alternatives for them.
And let us move a little bit towards payment getaways. Could you please explain to our viewers what a payment getaway is and how does it work?
If you remember at the beginning, your merchant account is the bit that authorizes the payment and moves it from customer to business bank. So the payment gateway supports the merchant account for online transactions. So basically, it encrypts the customer card details and makes sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, and that the payment's secure when you're making online checkout payments. So if you're using a merchant account provider and a payment gateway provider, and they're two separate, then the payment gateway provider will charge you per transaction as well. So that's how they make their money off it. When looking for a payment gateway, it's all about security, because the security for the customer and for you as a business. Because choosing the right payment gateway will mean that you get less chargebacks, which is a pain to deal with. And it means that your customers know that they're in the right place and their details are going to be secure. So there's two elements with a payment gateway. It's the PCI compliance, and basically ensuring that you tick that box. Now, PCI compliance works on a rating system, and we always suggest you go with somebody that is PCI compliance number 1, so that if you're going down that route, then you're not going to go too wrong.
A question about merchant cash advances. So do you think a merchant cash advance is a good idea for a business to have?
Okay, another blanket question. Right, so merchant cash advance has its purpose. I'm going to give you that. So merchant cash advance is really great for businesses that are either seasonal or they're closing down to renovate. So the way merchant cash advance works is it's a loan, which then your repayments are made through your card turnover. So, for example, I've got an ice cream shop and I am shutting down to renovate in winter. So I've got, say, 6 months maybe without processing card payments. During that period of time that you're shut down, you're not making any repayments to the loan. However, when you reopen in the summer and everyone's buying your ice creams, you then start making your repayments to the loan. And some would argue in those circumstances, because your turnover is higher, making those repayments isn't as painful. It's short-term finance. I think that's the key for merchant cash advance. It's I wouldn't ever, well, you can't get it over long terms, but it's a quick fix, shall we say.
If I understand correctly, certain things here in terms of merchant accounts, they are very subjective. Like there is no yes or no answer, right?
Exactly. So it's a bit like, I mean, as with personal borrowing, you could go to your bank tomorrow and be accepted for a loan. It has to go through an underwriting process. So somebody has to, or a machine has to, look at your case and say, look, first of all, are you legal and you're doing the right thing? And does it stack up for us as a business? Does it fit our criteria? If so, brilliant. Off you go, have a merchant account. But there are so many elements to it, which is why we exist as a business, I guess, because we write about those problems and we kind of try and solve them for clients.
Well, Libby, again, thank you very much. I'm going to go and digest. I tell you this. And I'm going to go and read a little bit more because certain things are really, really fascinating for me. And not that I'm going to start selling cookies, but I just might start selling something.
Sure. So go check out our website. It's there. We blog all the time about anything card payments related, any finance inquiries, anything like that. And recently we got a couple of brokers over your way in America. So we're happy to help. We're non-biased and completely free of charge. And I hope that you've seen that we're on your side as a business.